A very warm welcome to this video guide on how to get started with the drEEM Toolbox. So as you can see here in my MATLAB interface, nothing here. So I'm going to show you first of all how to install the drEEM Toolbox. I'm going to assume that you have MATLAB installed, otherwise you can also use MATLAB online. If you click to the add-on browser that is available through the Home tab, you can simply search for the drEEM Toolbox. As I do here, click on it and browse the information, but in the end you're going to click add to add the toolbox. This is going to go through and install the toolbox for you, so there's nothing you need to know about how to add toolboxes and so on and so on. You simply have to accept the license. You can see here that the installation is already complete and that a check mark is set that says open the getting started guide. So we simply close this, the add-on browser disappears, and you'll be greeted by the getting started guide. Before I do anything there, I'm going to type VER in the command window, and you can see at the bottom here that the drEEM Toolbox is installed. So after I know that the toolbox is installed, you can go back to the getting started guide. First of all, you'll see some information on what is in this guide. You can see how to initialize the toolbox, how to get help with the toolbox, and then already some examples and tutorials so you can immediately sort of get your hands dirty. First of all, how to work with the toolbox. It's a little different compared to older versions or compared to some other functions that you might use in MATLAB. This is a whole toolbox, so it's designed to offer you a whole range of methods. So in order to initialize the toolbox, you initialize the toolbox by calling it. And the easiest thing, instead of saying drEEM Toolbox all the time, is to give it a shorthand like TBX. You could assign any name though, such as H for handle or A for awesome toolbox. That's completely up to you. I choose TBX. I can evaluate this selection only, and you can see that now in the workspace, there's a variable called TBX. If you go to the command window and say TBX, this is actually an object, like any variable that you're used to working with. You can see what version this toolbox has, where it came from, what required version it has, where it's stored, and some other options that we're not going to get into. So to get started, you should simply type tbx dot, and you can see all kinds of properties. That's these yellow entries here, and methods. Those are functions. Each individual function is listed here. And you can see you can do a lot of things with this toolbox. And that might be a bit overwhelming. But in the end, if you forget how to do something in the toolbox, you can always sort of refer to these code suggestions here by typing tbx or drEEM Toolbox dot, hit the tab button as I do here, and you get these suggestions. So you can simply browse all the methods that are available at your disposal. But in the end, that might be slightly overwhelming. So you'll want help. So the easiest thing to do from the get-go is to type drEEM. And this is actually also mentioned here in the Getting Started guide, how to access the drEEM documentation. So I'm going to type this, and hopefully you'll be able to see the documentation in the browser window now. So this is the full designed formatted documentation for the toolbox. You can see a little sort of greeting from the developers of the toolbox. You can see some information about requirements and the installation of the toolbox, a function overview of the toolbox, so in a different way, a graphical overview over what's available in the toolbox. But always remember that each of these functions is to be called with TBX or drEEM Toolbox dot, and then for example import eames in this case, and so on and so on. You'll see some things in terms of what's new in the toolbox once updates are going to get published. Some information about the drEEM dataset object, and this brings me to something that is new in drEEM version 2. From now on, we work with standardized classes. So each fluorescence and absorbance dataset is a drEEM dataset object. It's actually called this exact thing. So if you type in the console drEEM dataset, you'll be greeted by a dataset with a lot of properties. They're made for you already, and there is no wiggle room here. So you can't add another property and you can't take a property away. This makes the toolbox more robust and will help you to understand how the toolbox and the datasets work. So not to go into too much depth, but you can see in the documentation that each of these properties has a little description about what this particular property is about, what it does, what it's meant for, and so on and so on. In here, you can also see that the dataset has a history, and the documentation also lists some information about the history. The history is basically designed to keep track of operations that have been done to your dataset. So when you export it, the history will be exported along the way, so that even after 10 years, it'll be obvious what has been done to this dataset. Important in that discussion also, if we go back to the dataset, is a property called status. You can see that down here. The status of a dataset informs the toolbox about what has been done to which critical operations have been done with the dataset. So the documentation goes into more detail here. You can see an entry on the dataset status. And this is usually changed via a graphical user interface, or GUI. And you can see all the status entries are listed in this image here. So you can see, for example, what's the status of the spectral correction? Have blanks been subtracted? Which path length does the absorbance use? Has the scatter been removed? Have the inner filter effects been corrected? And so on and so on. So when you export the data, it'll be very obvious what the status of the dataset is and how you can work with it from that standpoint. Okay, the documentation then has some helpful tutorials in two categories. One, tutorials concerning the toolbox and MATLAB. So how to work with the toolbox, some tips and tricks, how we usually design our scripts to work with data, and then some hands-on tutorials about how to work with actual data. All of these come as live scripts, so that in the beginning of each tutorial, sometimes you'll even find a video guide through the tutorial, but in each of the tutorials, there's a line in the beginning that you can copy and execute in the command window, which will bring up the live script that is basically this exact same page. So you can run through the code yourself and see the impact of different operations as it happens live. There are tutorials on data imports, data processing, data quality inspection, how to analyze fluorescence data, particularly with Parafac, and how to export data out of the toolbox. And that brings me back to the drEEM toolbox in MATLAB. As you can see, we're back at the Getting Started guide. The next step would simply be to open an empty script. In this case, it's a live script, but you can change that to a normal script or whatever you're used to. And a simple way to actually get started with your own data would be to call the import wizard. As you can see, it's already suggested here as the last command. If I type this, you get greeted by a graphical user interface that is designed to help you import fluorescence EAMs and absorbance spectra along with metadata. You can simply select a folder through this button here, where's your data stored, and then start importing your data and associating metadata to it to start working with it as is suggested in the tutorials. So that leaves me with just wishing you all the best for your fluorescence and absorbance analyses, and I'll see you in the next video.